Hi, I'm Siobhan McHale, and I'm the Executive General Manager of People, Culture and Change at Dulux Group. I'm also the author of the book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change. On today's show, you'll learn three key things. The first myth I bust is that HR is not solely responsible for culture change. The second thing that you'll learn is that culture is much more than just employee engagement. And the third thing you'll learn on today's show is the 4 practical steps in order to create a culture that delivers, grows, and adapts. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to part 2 of our interview, a wonderful, delicious chat with Siobhan McHale. She is an insider, having been an executive in charge of culture change in a series of multinational firms. One of insider jobs has been the 7-year change initiative at ANZ Bank that took them from the lowest performing bank to the highest performing, one of the highest performing banks in the world. Her work is used at Harvard Business School by Professor John Cotter to teach MBA students about change. She is the author of a brand new book called The Insider's Guide to Culture Change that is absolutely phenomenal. And she's looking at culture in a very different way than we normally look at culture. In part 1, we talked about stopping the blame game. We talked about recognizing patterns. And we talked about the need to take that external view and how we have to make sure that people are protected in revealing so they can really get to the truth. Welcome back, Siobhan. We want to get back into this second part by talking about your 4 steps. Now, in the book, you lay out these 4 steps of cultural change. And we were talking before that culture is not the enemy of strategy, as Peter Drucker said, that these things go side by side, but we got to start by understanding what is the purpose of the culture. And that's how we get it to implement the strategy. So let's walk through these 4 steps, and which you started in with the diagnose. So let's start walking that through a little bit more.
Yeah, so diagnosing where your culture is at in relation to what is your strategy. So really, the culture work starts with who are we as a business? Where do we play and how do we win? And it's surprising how many companies struggle with that conversation about, where do we play and how do we win? For example, at the infrastructure company that I was working in, where Ben was the CEO, they weren't quite sure whether they wanted to be more a consulting company or more a labor hire company. Now, the cultures required for those 2 different businesses are very different. You need a different type of much more process-driven culture for a labor hire company, whereas for a consulting company, you need a much more innovative, solution-focused type culture. So the conversation started, what business are we in? That was really what we were trying to resolve. And then once we got clear on that, then we started to say, well, what sort of culture do you really need to create, and where is it now? And the culture that they wanted to create was very solution focused, performance driven culture, and they had a culture that really had emerged as one that was more about the nice guys. The company had been formed in the 50s by 2 Italian immigrants who had emigrated to the States, and clients loved them, and their employees were sent to all of these dangerous and far-flung locations, and bonds between each other became critical to their survival. But over the years, these close bonds and this loyalty morphed into, we're not giving each other feedback because we want to be liked and belong to the family more than we want to perform for the clients. So you could see how that pattern had emerged, and you can see its logic and its rationality, but it actually wasn't serving the company any longer.
Right. And you said something there that's very interesting, because a company evolves very often. A company just evolves, and it might evolve in multiple directions and could even have several arms. As you said, the consulting versus the actual physicality. So does that become we have to choose one, or does that become we are 2 divisions with 2 different cultures?
Yes, it could be we are two divisions with two different cultures. It's never a one size fits all. But the overarching, from Ben's perspective, he needed to see what are the two or three, or even one for him, what is the big pattern that is running this organization? That
Mhm.
actually it's running us, we're not running it. And that's where you
Right.
know you have problems, because 60% of his contracts were running in the red because he was caught by the nice guy pattern. So what
Hmm.
was happening was that pattern wasn't just staying within the company. His project managers were doing favors for clients for free. So the clients would say, oh, could you move that wall 6 inches? Or could you install that new piece of copper piping for no charge? Or could you do me this favor? And project managers, wanting to be the nice guys, just said, yeah, sure, I can do that for you. Now, that was okay in a soft contract world, but the
Yes.
world had moved on to hard contracts where margins, you didn't get a margin on top. The price was fixed. So this culture of being the nice guy that had once served the company was no longer serving the company. And that's what Ben had to see.
See, that's what I think you brought up something there that's powerfully important, that I would put forward, and that is this: is the company you have the company you had? Because the
Mm.
culture you had may not fit with the company you have, right? And that's what you're really asking them to look at, right?
Yes, indeed. Or the context might have changed.
Exactly.
So context is everything. This company was born in a soft contract world where you just got a margin on top of your costs, a really healthy margin. So you didn't have to manage your budgets. You just said yes to everything, and the client paid you all your costs plus a margin.
Yeah.
Then the world changed, and customers started to say, well, this is costing us a lot. Let's just have a fixed price for these massive big contracts. And then the risk sits with the contractor, the risk sits with Ben. But
Yes.
within the company, nothing changed. They just kept saying yes to all this additional work without charging for it. And this nice guy pattern that had once served them and made clients like them and give them more work was now causing 60% of their contracts to erode. And once Ben saw that pattern, which seems obvious from the outside, but he was completely caught in it, then he could change that pattern. And within a year, he transformed the company, and the majority of his contracts were once again making profit.
So the question obviously becomes, were they as liked? Because, at a values position, being liked was obviously a very high value because it was perpetrated throughout the organization. So the question becomes, okay, well, because it feels like if we are not liked if we do things that won't make us as liked, we may be more profitable, but we won't be as liked. So the question
Mm.
is, were we as liked?
So the pattern, you've got to be careful with patterns. So the pattern or agreement was that relationships matter more than performance. The new pattern that we started to emerge was performance and relationships matter. So we put contract managers into role of managing contracts commercially as well as the relationship with clients. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because the
No,
pendulum can swing. So that
exactly.
was the new agreement that started to emerge, that we reframed the role of contract managers from nice guys or gals to contract managers. Now, when you manage a contract properly, you have to manage the multiple stakeholders in that
Yeah,
contract. So
fascinating.
that's a really excellent question.
So now we have the sense of the diagnosis of the real patterns, what's really going on, versus what we think is going on or what we like to blame it on. So, okay, we've got that. Then we're going to, in order to do that, do we have to then go to what is the purpose of the organization? Not just what business are we in, but what is the purpose, or is that not in there yet?
Well, we've started with that. So we got really clear with Ben what is the purpose of the organization, therefore, what culture do you need, therefore, what culture is it now? All of this is in diagnose. So it's quite
Mhm. Yep.
it's a very important step. And not to intervene in the wrong way, because with Ben, he'd put everybody on finance training. He'd spent $500,000 on finance training, but people were going to the training in the wrong role. They were
Hmm.
going to the training in nice guy or girl role. The second step is about reframing. So you start to use the remarkable power of role reframing
Hmm.
to accelerate change. Now, why does role reframing work so well? Because you can wake up in the morning and you can say hello to your spouse or your wife in role of husband. If you've
Hmm.
got children, you bump into them in the corridor, you step into role of parent and your
Hmm.
behavior changes in that role. You go to work, you might be in role of boss. You behave in a certain way in role of boss. If you've got a team and you meet your team, you step into role of team leader. Later on that day, you might meet with some of your peers. You step into role of peer. Even in the same meeting, even in our interaction now on this podcast, we're in multiple roles. We might be in
Hmm.
role of questioner, of listener, of challenger, of provocateur, of learner, of sharer, multiple roles. And these mental maps really of our roles shape our behavior in a
Hmm.
way that is just as powerful as our personality. But yet leaders are taught that the way to influence behavior is to intervene at the level of personality. Now it's very difficult to change somebody's personality.
Good
That
luck with that.
takes years of therapy. So I talk to leaders about using the remarkable power of role reframing to bring about faster change with less noise.
So, can you talk to us a little bit about how that works down the line? Because you talked about, you realized with Ben, and then Ben stepped in and went, "Oh, okay, I'm playing nice guy. I need to just ask for what I want." But when a leader is leading others, and maybe they've confronted their own poor behavior, but now they have to confront the poor behavior of another who they lead, who may be a great person but is maybe running nice guy or nice gal or something else altogether. Talk to us a little bit about guiding that.
Yeah, so it's about really every leader beginning to see the patterns. So, for example, with Ben, he started to see, oh, I'm in the nice guy pattern. Who else is in that role? Who
Mm,
else is in role of nice guy? Who else is caught by this pattern? They're good people, they're doing their best, but they think that the way to take up their role as leader in this company is to be the nice guy.
yeah.
So I've got to help them draw a new mental map of their role. So with each of Ben's direct reports, he starts to see the pattern. He starts to say, oh, in your contract where you're doing all these free favors for the client, actually, what role do you think you're in there? Oh, well, I'm just
Mm,
making the client happy. I'm trying to be not, I'm trying to get the good
yeah.
relationship with the client. And then Ben says, well, actually, that's not just your role anymore. I want you to manage this contract. So Ben starts to help everybody in the company who reports to him to do the reframe. Then they in turn start to work with their people to do the reframe. And it's sort of this catalyst. Now at ANZ Bank, we did that in an accelerated way by sending 32,000 people on a 3-day workshop called Breakout. So you can accelerate the change if
Of
you
course.
want to, rather than have it just conversation by conversation. We had this whole initiative to give people the reframe at the bank, which is one of the reasons why it was so powerful.
Yeah, it's fabulous. So we've now okay, so let's walk us through to the next step. What's the next step?
So breaking the pattern can take a while, but you often have to break it in multiple ways. And one of the ways to scaffold that or to strengthen the change is to actually put in new processes and procedures and systems that reinforce the change that you're trying to make. So that's about really breaking the pattern. And then the fourth step is consolidating that,
Mhm.
because patterns are sneaky little things. and they're often deeply embedded, and they often come back to bite you again. So you
Yeah.
have to keep your foot on the accelerator over the longer term. I often see leadership teams, and you'd have seen this, Dove, as well. They go away on these offsites. They have these great insights. They fill up reams of paper with all these ideas, but they don't keep the foot on the accelerator over the longer term. And then it all slips back again into the old ways.
Right. So how do we get them to do that? Let's look at that, because, one of the greatest challenges we have as human beings is embedded behaviors. Embedded behaviors are not easy to break. There is a reward system in the brain for keeping shitty behavior, right?
Mm,
Because
yeah.
it's simply familiar, and familiar is comfortable, and comfortable is okay, even if it's terrible even if it'll bring a business down, it's kind of okay. So how do we do this? How do we consolidate and pull people back to this change that we want, when there is a natural propensity? The car pulls right, and it's always going to pull right, and you've got to keep your hand on the wheel to keep it centered. And every now and then people are nodding off and it's going off to the right.
Great question. So leaders, if I had to take it up to the very highest level,
Yeah.
leaders take up two roles. They run their business, and that's the role, I'm running my business every day. And that role tends to consume most leaders. The second role that you've got to step into is your change leader role. So you're not just running your business, you're a change leader, you're changing your business. And you've got to toggle between those two roles. And in your role as a change leader, one of the things to do regularly is step onto the bridge with your leadership team and bring them onto the bridge with you and say, how are we tracking on this journey? As the captain of the ship, how are we tracking? How are we traveling? How far have we come? Let's look backwards. How far have we come? Gosh, we've done well. We've gotten to these milestones. How far do we have to go? What are we seeing that's blocking our progress? How are we managing and leading this change? What conversations are we having? So Ben, for example, having regular meetings with his team, and not just talking about the operational issues, not just talking about the infrastructure projects and the construction projects, but actually saying, how are we going and shifting the nice guy pattern? What conversations have you had? What feedback are we getting? Is it shifting or not shifting? Is it making a difference on our contracts? Are more of them moving out of the red and into profit? Why is that happening? How are we going to accelerate it even further? So Ben had time in his regular leadership team meetings, not just for his run the business role, but also for his change the business role.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because again, it's one of those things that I think that leaders often want to pass that off onto HR or whoever it is, and you and I have talked about how it's not HR's responsibility. So talk to us a little bit about more about that, because I think that a lot of time a leader thinks, I'll just hand this off to HR, and
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
it's a great point. And when I joined the infrastructure company where Ben was the CEO, I had a meeting with all of the executive team in my first week. And I was meeting with the CFO, and he had a great conversation with me, and he was really clear that the organization needed to change its culture. He said, we need to become higher performing and more commercial, Siobhan, explaining to me why. At the end of the hour, we stood up, he shook my hand, and he said, Siobhan, I'm wishing you all the very best of luck in changing the culture. And in that moment, I realized, oh, okay, he thinks it's my job in HR to change the culture. So I sat back down with him, and we started to explore role in culture change. And that was where the work began, with the executive team talking about whose role is it to change the culture. Now it's a joined up role. So culture change is leader-led at all levels, I always say, but it's enabled by HR. So HR need to provide the advice, the tools, the processes, the ways to accelerate this change. And managers need to lead the change within their areas. But that wasn't happening with Ben and at the infrastructure company. They kept on delegating the change to HR, which is why it wasn't working. as well as
Yeah,
the fact that they didn't see the pattern, but they were completely leaving it to the wrong part of the organization entirely to fix the
yeah.
culture.
It's fascinating to me because I've always said that the ugly redheaded stepchild of the C-suite is HR. You know, they just always get sort of,
Thanks.
you know what I mean by, like, they get they get the lowest treatment, they get the lowest place on the totem pole, but they often carry the largest amount of weight around. You know, I mean, if you don't have people, you don't have a business. As simple as that. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you don't know your people, you don't have the business. And it's so often that HR are just treated poorly. And I also think that HR don't stand up enough, and they become
Mm,
the buffer zone for legal, as opposed to, let's build our people, let's develop our people, let's build the culture where the people are actually know where. Because I think a lot of time culturally, people don't know where they belong. They have a
mm,
role, but they don't know really where they belong. And you know what you're talking about is so much more in depth around, you belong here, not as a cultural fit, but you belong inside of this organization because this is what we're about, and this is
mm.
what we're driving for, and here's how you can be part of that. So it's that inclusion piece, and that's why I liked
Yeah.
what you're saying about the feedback piece.
Yes, you belong here. And what is the mental map you have of your role? How do you take
Exactly.
up that role and belonging? So, for example, at the ANZ, moving the mental map from victim to customer support provider, that's a very different mental map. One mental map is, well, I just am told what to do here by head office. I don't have any say. I'm just going through the motions. And the other mental map is, I'm completely responsible for serving and delighting and meeting the needs of our customers. And I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. Two
Yeah,
very different mental maps and two
totally.
very different sets of behaviors.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. So you've been doing this a while. This is your
Yeah.
gig, but life is a journey. And that, it's easy for people to look at that and go, oh, it's easy for you, whatever. But that's not the case. It's a journey. So where were you blundering along in this area? What was the turning point for you? When was you realized this is the problem? Or was it
Yeah.
over a period of time, or were you just like, where were you in your own way for a long time?
I was probably in my own way multiple times, but
Yeah,
one
it's
of
not
the
usually
key,
one.
lots of times.
Yeah.
One of the, I've had two major turning points. The first was when I moved from an outsider, a consultant, where I'd been a consultant for a decade, into an insider role. And I saw things differently every day, working with leaders, rolling up my sleeves, making change happen. That's the role I wrote the book from. And the second role was really stepping into my role as an educator and deciding that I had something to say. I needed to say it. People needed to hear, some people, if they chose to hear, what the learnings were from that insider role. And deciding to step into that role of educator, I think, was another critical turning point for me, Dove.
So what does it mean? Let's go to that for a minute, because I think that's actually a very fascinating subject all on its own, which is, what does it mean to you when you say, I'm an educator?
Yeah, what it means is I have two key roles. I'm the head of HR at Dulux Group, an
Yeah.
international paints company, but I've also chosen to step into my role to share what I've learned as an insider. So I was in bookstores looking for books from practitioners, and there were lots of great books out there from outsiders, academics in particular, journalists writing about culture, consultants writing about culture, all great perspectives, but very few from insiders who had actually made change happen and
Mm-hmm.
transformed companies. So rather than saying, well, where are the people and why aren't they writing the books? I had to look at myself and say, well, why aren't you contributing to this? Because writing a book isn't easy. There's a lot to go through, but I decided to step into the role to be an educator, to share what I know, despite the fact that I've got a full-time job that I love.
Right.
But on my weekends, getting up at 5 in the morning, which is why I'm bright and breezy, because I do my writing very early at 5 in the morning. And yeah, so that was my decision to contribute, because I'm so passionate about creating better workplaces, and that passion fuels me.
It's interesting to me because in my work with leaders across the board, I always say, what pissed you off enough to make a change? And it's inevitable that it's something that frustrated us. And it's like, nobody's writing this from that perspective. Nobody's doing this in that way. And it's like, and instead of looking, again, that blame game, instead of looking at, well, why haven't they done it? Why isn't Peter Drucker or somebody written about this in this way? You go, because it's not their responsibility, it's mine. Yeah. And that's a big golf ball to swallow, because it's like, okay, I got to do this now. I'd rather
Yeah,
you did it. I could just recommend the book, right? No, you got to get up at 5 a.m. You got to write, and then you got to go to work, and then you got to come home and write a bit more, and then you
yeah,
can visit with your kids if you like, but not much.
yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
understand.
so that was huge for me. It was like, well, how committed are you to this? You're not seeing what you want. You're not seeing the real life stories. You're seeing academic and theoretical books. You've got to take up the role. You've got to stop complaining about it. So yeah, the buck stopped with me, and that's where I stepped into that role of educator.
And we appreciate that. So as we come to the end of this show, let's talk about, because I always like to ask my guests for something really practical, because let's take this out of the highfalutin, lovely idea space and move it into the practicality that somebody can use on a daily basis, preferably that somebody can sort of take what you've been talking about here, or something we haven't got to yet, that they could go and do, preferably in the next 5 minutes, but certainly within the next 24 hours or next working day, to integrate some of what you've shared. Of course, we'd recommend that they go read the book, but right
Yeah,
now.
even jotting down the answers to the question, how is our culture meeting our business goals? Even having that conversation with your team. How is our culture meeting our business goals today?
Mm,
And what culture would we need in order to better or accelerate the delivery of our business goals? Even asking those two questions, I think, can get you on the right path, can start to reframe from culture as a nice, soft, our employees happy, to actually culture as an enabler for your business strategy and the delivery of that strategy. So I would start there. Do we have the culture that is enabling the delivery of our business goals? And start to have those conversations in your team and see where that takes you to. And then if you want to learn more, you can buy the Insider's Guide to Culture Change. It is very practical. It's 4 steps. It's not, four is better than 10 in my view. It's the essence of getting simple and giving people practical tools. But just have that conversation.
yeah.
Do some thinking on that yourself today, I would say.
And I think it's a terrific point that you've been hammering home, and I love it, which is, does the culture facilitate where we're going, what we're doing? And I think that we tend to go the other way. We tend to go, well, what is our strategy for the business? And then what is our culture as a separate thing, as opposed to, where do we want to go as a business? What do we want to be about? And does the culture we have really facilitate that? And if it doesn't, that's on us. So what are we going to
Mm,
do about that? Which is why
yeah.
I highly recommend the book. That's a fabulous note to finish on. So Siobhan, again, uh, please share with our audience where they can find out more about you, about your book, about all the different ways they can tap into your resources.
Yes, you can get the book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change, on Amazon. And please follow me on LinkedIn if you're interested in all things culture, leadership, or human resources.
Fabulous. And again, we will definitely post all of the links to Siobhan's website and to how you can find the book, etc. It'll all be there in the show notes for you. So if you just scroll down and have a look. And Siobhan McHale, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for all that you've shared. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for writing the book that people weren't writing.
Thank you for a great conversation, Dove.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your true capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com, because unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about whether your culture serves the strategy that you want to have as an organization. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.